guys, it's Kelly Latavola here, and I'm back with another video for Honeybee Stamps. Today I'm going to be using a couple of different products from their new release. I showed you the masks, but I didn't end up using them. It just wasn't in the works for this card. But I did use Happy B-Day, the party set, which I love, the stamp set, and the dies I didn't use. I swapped them out for the birthday ones. Same thing, stamps and dies. And then I am using these balloon card borders, which is really ultimately what drew me to make this card. Peanut's birthday is coming up in May. He loves shakers. So I kind of had to do a little bit of brainstorming for how I was going to make this card a shaker. But in the end, it all totally worked out. So the dies are created to give the look of this huge balloon that goes outside of the frame, which I love and I think is totally adorable. But in order to make it a shaker, the balloon cuts off the sides and the top of the card. So a little bit challenging. Also, because it is for my own child, I wanted it to be a little bit extra special as far as, like the little birthday scene, and Happy B-Day was just totally perfect for that. It's got a lot of cute little characters that are all dressed up for a birthday party. I am doing a 1-layer scene there. So I'm going to do some stamping and some masking to put all those characters down there. Whenever you're masking, you want to start with whatever you want to see all of first. So like I want the bunny in front, I want the bear in front. So I stamped those first, and then you saw me make the masks. I'm going to proceed through each individual image, masking and stamping as I go to create the whole scene. This video is actually a day late from the post because my allergies were so bad yesterday that I couldn't have done a voiceover if I wanted to. And even now I'm still pretty sniffly. So hopefully you can look past it. Otherwise we would never be able to do a YouTube video because we're at the height of allergy season. So now that I have my bear and my bunny masked, I'm going to go ahead and stamp the little tree trunk with the birthday cake, the bee carrying the present, and then one of the gifts. That's going to be like my second layer, so you'll be able to see parts of these. And I know that like his little hat is hanging off the top. I'm not super worried about it. Once I have here, I actually, where the little bee's present was, it didn't stamp great, so I just needed to restamp that part. Joy of a stamp positioner. So now I've masked all of like the bee and the cake and the present, and I'm going to stamp 2 more presents in the background just to kind of fill up that space. And then the reason I have masks for everything is because in order to add color quickly, I am going to be doing some distress inking over the background. I just picked my favorite like go-to blues and greens just to get some color down. There are some areas, like especially with the candles, where like they did catch. And so I found myself having to kind of start on the mask and then go up instead of come down from the balloon top and then go back down. So sometimes when you're doing these types of scenes and trying to put distress ink in the background, like you have masking, you just need to find a different way to approach it so that you're not constantly pulling up that one side of it. And then I really didn't have any issues on the bottom with the green pulling up so much, probably just because those pieces aren't super finicky or tiny. They're more like solid, less likely to pull up. And then again, this is just, I'll be adding a little bit to it with Copic markers, but really it just saves me a ton of ink and gets me really good blending super quickly. So just going to go ahead and remove all of those masks just so you guys can kind of see what this little scene will look like when we get to the coloring. And then I'm going to move on to the balloon part. So after doing a little bit of brainstorming and talking to a crafty friend, I discovered that, well, I thought, and I tried, and it did work, that I could color the acetate with alcohol inks. Now, full disclosure, I recommend that you use the alcohol blending solution, but I did not have any, so I'm using just straight alcohol here. This is a piece of acetate that I cut down to 4.5 by 4 to fit behind the balloon part. I just put on some rubbing alcohol, and then I'm going to start dropping in some color. These are the Adirondack inks. I used sunrise orange, watermelon, which is the red, and what is the name of the yellow? I can't remember. And I used them in the regular, this is just regular alcohol inks, and now I'm going to add more alcohol so it starts spreading. My watercolor media mat, which is underneath this, will stain with alcohol inks. So that's why I have this sitting here. This is just watercolor paper that I have not opened yet. And it had plastic wrap around it. So I figured, well, that would be a great basis to not have to stain a bunch of things or worry about that. So now I'm adding in the alcohol pearls, and I tried to keep everything kind of concentrated around the edges. I ended up using my finger because when I opened up the watermelon, it like leaked all over my hand, and I'm not really sure. I haven't opened them since I moved, so like what kind of pressure was on them, I'm not really sure. But I already had red all over my hands. It looked like a murder scene. So I just used my finger to move my inks around. They have felt pads you can use. You can use a paintbrush. You can use all kinds of things. And one of the little Tim Holtz air blowers, you can use those as well. I just used my finger. Not recommended if you don't like messy. So I just kind of kept building up the color around there. I did pick it up and kind of move it around because I didn't really have any color at all in the center. And I'm just going to kind of keep building the color. It's difficult for me to do because it is so messy, and I don't really like the mess. On my hands doesn't bother me, but like on the project, I don't really like when it's super messy. And I did have to play with this a ton. I'm not going to act like I didn't. I wanted a little bit more color variation, so I did add some more alcohol to the center to kind of lighten that up. I was worried that it would be too dark and you wouldn't be able to see any of the shaker pieces behind it. That's why I kept lightening up the center. I wanted the majority of the color to be on the edges. Why do I want darker color on the edges? Because when you build a shaker card, typically it's enclosed with foam tape. And in order to enclose it with foam tape, I have to put it across the top and across the sides. Well, you can see through acetate. So you're going to be able to see my foam tape, which I did not want. So I figured by, especially the pearls are substantially more opaque than the regular alcohol inks. So I thought, okay, well, that'll be really good if I put that around the edges and you really won't be able to see it. And it did work. You can barely see, even though I know it's there, like you can barely see the foam tape behind it. And you'll see when we get there, I did cut down the foam tape. So here I'm just kind of drying this very quickly so I can kind of move on with the next steps. I didn't have a whole lot of time to be crafty this particular day. You do have to be very careful with heating acetate. It can warp very easily. That's why you see me constantly moving the heat gun around. And then eventually, once I can get it dry enough, I'm going to pick it up so I can get the liquid underneath it and then also dry the backside. When I was done here, like you can see, it's pretty clear in the center, not a whole lot of pigment, which is ish what I wanted, but not exactly. So I let it dry. I didn't love it when I put it with the card. I did not super love it. So then I'm going to go back to the drawing board. And that's one of the things that's really great about alcohol inks is I don't have to waste another piece of acetate. You can, if I wanted to, which I didn't, but if you want to, you could put alcohol on it, wipe it off with a baby wipe and start all over again. I mean, you might have some staining depending upon the colors you use, but really you could just start all over again and be fine. So here, because it wasn't as smooth as I wanted, I just dumped a bunch of alcohol on top of it, and then I sapped up the edges, and then I just pretty much let it sit. Just let it do its thing before going in and adding more color. I did want more color in the center, just kind of playing around with it till I get the result that I like. Don't be discouraged if you sit down and do like the first part of your piece and it doesn't really come out. Just hang tight and try again. Like I said, super forgiving. Eventually I just started picking up the ink and kind of like putting it back on the paper. This did get me a very good result for darker edges. But you'll see that actually the center got a little bit too dark again. So it was just kind of like this constant back and forth. This was probably the longest part, and even with all the coloring, this was probably the longest part. But that's okay. I think it was worth it in the end because it is a card that is, for somebody special. So I let this sit. I'm just making sure all the parts are dry here. And it doesn't look transparent when it's on the background. It still is transparent. Like, the colors are not this dark, for the record. And I'm not sure, I can't remember if I lifted it up so you could see that or not. So this is just on white. And then I just dropped a little bit of alcohol in the center to kind of lighten up that color. And then I'm going to tip it around and kind of like dab it with my finger to get rid of that super harsh edge. But ultimately it did lighten up the center for me, and I was happy with the way that looked. So this will be the look for the final piece. Now you won't be able to see the full piece because it's going to be behind that card, but ultimately this is what we went with. So you can still see through it. I felt like you would still be able to see the shaker bits enough. Now we're going to move on to the coloring. That's why this video is so long, because the alcohol portion of it took so long, and then I still had to color up all of the characters. So I colored this the way that I would normally do it, lightest to darkest, darkest to lightest. I tried to incorporate Peanut's current favorite color is orange. It's always been red, but now he's moved on to orange. So I tried to incorporate the reds and orange in there, also to bring in the colors from that balloon. I wanted it to be reflected in the coloring below as well, so everything looked like it went together. And pretty much that was, I feel like there's enough elements in the bottom that the red orange balloon doesn't look out of place. So yeah, as far as story time, and Lord knows we're going to have enough time for it, right? Whoo, buddy, this is a long one. It's just been, life has just been kind of crazy lately. With all of the things going on, as I talked about in my last video, I'm having a little bit of trouble adjusting to my schedule and feeling like I have any time to get anything done. And then yesterday was a super bad allergy day. It was just nonstop all day, like to the point where I was on the verge of tears. I was so frustrated with just not being able to get anything done. Like, here it is, my one a day to accomplish things, and I cannot do them or do them as fast as I would like to because I have to stop every 5 seconds to sneeze or to wipe my nose. Constant like headache, pressure, and so finally I ended up just calling it a night way earlier than I would normally do. I was basically just mad about everything yesterday is pretty much what it came down to. And so, like, everybody has those days. They are not fun. Like, obviously 0 stars, do not recommend, but they happen to all of us. And, you just gotta, tomorrow's another day, move past it, because if I sat and dwelled on all of the things that I didn't get to get done because I was busy feeling like trash all day, thanks to an allergy that basically my body thinks that it is being attacked when nobody really cares. Like, the grass is not going to hurt you. You're fine. There's no reason to rebel. But I did talk to my allergist. I know several of you have made suggestions about the immunization shots. I am going to do them. That is the game plan, but I cannot do them until after Rona 2020 is over, because I have to go get the shots in the beginning every day. And I cannot do that right now with the childcare situation. Like I said, Eric and I, cars passing in the driveway pretty much. And so without having to take Peanut into the office with me, which I am not willing to do, I cannot do the shots right now. But as soon as that's available, I'm totally on that. Like white on rice, y'all. I cannot wait to be done with these things. So in the meantime, the allergist recommended using my nose spray every day, which I do, and mixing up my antihistamines. So I have a prescription one that I take at night. So they suggested I take like a Zyrtec or a Claritin in the morning, and then maybe throw a Benadryl in the middle of the day. basically do whatever I can to get it under control with medication. The only thing you can't take multiples of is Sudafed. That you have to take within the prescribed time frame. So I do take that every 4 hours. Today is another day. My allergies are acting up again, but not nearly as severely as yesterday. And please, Jesus, I hope it stays that way because I cannot do 2 days in a row like that. So yeah, that's that. If you have been watching my Instagram, you know that this past week, I actually bought a new car, which is exciting and also a little sad. So Ford had tons of incentives going on, and I knew I was going to have to buy a new car anyway. Like I told you guys previously, we've always been a Ford family. My first vehicle that I ever owned was a Mercury Topaz, which Mercury is owned by Ford, and it was like the hand-me-down car. So my dad drove it for work, and then when Kim got her license, they actually bought her a car, which was a Chevy Nova hatchback, and she was in a terrible accident when I was 13, she was 16. And it was her fault. She pulled out, she was making a left-hand turn, and she pulled out in front of a semi. She got T-boned by a semi in a little Chevy Nova hatchback, and she had 2 girlfriends in the car. Thankfully, nobody was hurt. God was so watching out for her. That whole thing was I wasn't even planning on telling the story, but here we are. The whole thing was kind of crazy because I grew up in a household where, my mom was a stay-at-home mom until I was in 6th grade. And then she did go back to work at Ford, where she had taken a leave of absence. And then my dad was a pipe fitter or blue-collar family, and he worked all the time. But we spent plenty of time with them as a family. But on Friday nights, once we got older, they always did things for themselves. They were mom and dad, but they were always John and Nancy. And they met bowling, which I never did tell that story. I gotta put that one on the back burner. They met bowling. They both bowled. They still bowl. My dad bowls league on Monday. My mom bowls league on Wednesday. They bowl mixed doubles on every other Saturday. It used to be every Saturday when we were kids, but on Friday nights, that was their night to go do their own things with their friends or whatever. So this particular Friday night, my dad had gone to the track. Northfield is the one in Ohio, and my mom had gone out to dinner with her girlfriends. Now this is before the days of cell phones, mind you. Okay, dating myself here. And I was at home, and I was having a friend sleep over. So Kim had gone out with her girlfriends. They were supposed to go to the skate station. Again, dating. Do kids even go to skate stations anymore? I don't even know. But so she was out with her friends. I was at home, and I got a phone call on our, house phone, no cell phones. And I answered the phone. It was a complete stranger who said that he was looking for my mom or my dad. And I said, well, they're unavailable right now, because I was always taught you don't tell people they're not home. They're unavailable. How can I help you? And he said, is your sister Kim? And I was like, yes. And he's like, well, she's been in an accident. She's fine, but we need to get a hold of her parents to get them to the hospital. They're taking her. And I was like, what is happening? And so this particular guy, apparently, I don't know if he was independently wealthy or what at the time, because this was 90s, had a cell phone. He was on the side of the road, and he said, do you want to talk to her? And I said, yes. And she got on the phone, and I was like, Kim, are you okay? What's going on? And long enough basically for her to say my name, and then that was it. She was gone. And so he's like, can you get a hold of your parents to have them, go to such and such hospital? And I was like, yeah. So I have no way to get a hold of my mom and dad. I call my grandmother, who my grandcracker, who is now the grandmother that my mom's mom, that she's taking care of. And I was like, this guy called, said Kim was in this car accident. I need to get a hold of mom and dad. And so, I was trying to figure out who was in the car with her as well. And so I started calling, after I got off the phone with my grandmother, I started calling her girlfriends, trying to figure out who else was in the car. And then my grandmother called me back. She was able to get a hold of my father, and she called the racetrack and had them page him, like overhead paging. And she could not, they got a hold of him, but he couldn't get a hold of my mom. So of course it's the one Friday night that she goes to a different like country music dance place than she did any other night. Like it was the one night they decided to try a new place. So he calls the place she normally goes to. She's not there. He can't get a hold of her. He comes home. He tries calling a bunch more people, and he was like, I can't wait any longer. If your mother comes home, tell her I went to the hospital. And I said, okay. So in the meantime, he had called my mom's friend Kathy, who lived like down the street. And so Kathy came to stay with me. And I will never forget this. And especially now as a mother, like I cannot even imagine what she was thinking. So Kathy and I are standing outside. My mom comes home. She pulls into the driveway and she like whips into the driveway. It's super fast. And so I figure somebody's gotten a hold of her. So I like go running over to the door and I was like, you know, did dad get a hold of you or whatever, blah, blah, blah. And she was like, no. And I was like, oh. And so she's like, what's going on? And I was like, well, Kim got into an accident. They said that she's okay. They took her to the hospital. Dad came home, but then he went to the hospital. He said to meet him there. And like the look on my mother's face was just like blank. Like I don't even know how to describe it. It was just totally blank. And then she like put the car in reverse and started to go back down the driveway. And then she put it back in drive. And like Kathy was like, Nancy, get out of the car. I will drive you to the hospital. Get out of the car. So Kathy took my mom to the hospital. And then it turns out, like, thank God, she got T-boned by a semi. They had to use the jaws of life to get her out of the Chevy Nova hatchback. And she legit had a scratch behind her ear and a bruised knee. Like, that was it. Her other two girlfriends were totally fine. If you looked at the car after the accident, like everything from the driver's side door up was completely demolished. The rest of the car looked like it had never even been in an accident. Like nothing was wrong with it. It was crazy. So anyway, so after that happened, Kim ended up with my dad's work car, which was the Mercury Topaz. And then that became my car when I got a driver's license. And this is just, you know, sometimes life is just mean. And so the air conditioning didn't work. I got my driver's license in June. So I drove around with no air conditioning pretty much halfway of the summer. My dad decides to take pity on me and get the air conditioning fixed. We get it fixed. 2 weeks later, the transmission just dies. The car just dies. So then we went looking for another car just to get me like to and from, you know, work or whatever, nothing super fancy. And I got a 1993 Ford Tempo, teal in color. Yes, envision that. Do it. It was a 4-door where my Topaz was a 2-door. But in case you are not familiar with cars, Mercury was owned by Ford. A Mercury Topaz is the same thing as a Ford Tempo. They just have two different names. So essentially, I just bought the same car I already had. One was just a 2-door and one was a 4-door. And the other one was teal. Teal? Yes, it was. So then I drove that car until I started working at the police station. And then it started having all kinds of transmission issues. It left me stranded on the side of the road. I sat down with my parents, did a little bit of math. Now that I was working part-time, but I was making fairly good money and I was getting consistent hours. So then we looked at me buying my first car that I ever owned, which was a 2005 Ford Focus. Dark gray in color. It was like, that was the car I wanted. And then I wanted, side impact airbags, but apparently that only came on rich people's cars because the only one they could find me had a quote-unquote weather package, which included heated seats, defrostable mirrors, and a sunroof, moonroof. Let's go back to the card. So here I picked up my my alcohol ink panel to see how it would look behind it, and apparently I got some on my fingers, and then I touched this card and got it on the wing. So fortunately, alcohol inks, alcohol markers, I was able to use my colorless blender to pick up a lot of that color. And then you'll see later on, I also realized that I got it on the side, and I will fix that as well. I'm going to add just a couple of details with a white gel pen and then outline everything. And then we'll move on to putting the shaker together. So I had that car, and then I bought my Focus, and I got the fancy Focus, and this is the first time I ever in my life had heated seats. And after I had them, I said I would never not have them again because they were amazing and I loved them. And I drove that car for 8 years. It was a 5. I got rid of it in 12. Do that math. And the only reason I got rid of it is because, again, the transmission was starting to go. And by this time I was pregnant with Peanut. And my ex-husband was like, you're not just going to be like driving around this car that's going to break down all the place, just enormously pregnant. Like, we're going to get a new car. So I didn't really have time to think about it. And we went to the dealership, and we didn't even clean the car out. They didn't test drive it, nothing. They pretty much just was like, okay, here's what we'll give you. My ex-husband was like, that's not enough. He talked them up. We ended up trading in the car that night and like walked away with the Ford Focus that I have been driving for the last 7 years. 7 years? Yeah, I bought it in 12 and it's 20, so 8 years. And so I've just been driving that. Those Focuses are notorious for having engine problems, for having transmission issues. There's like a whole class action lawsuit about all that business. Okay, so we're going to start building the shaker. I've lined this up on my card back so that I know that the size will be exactly what it's supposed to be. And then I just put some tape on the back of my panel and line that up. Now, remember when I said I cut it to 4.5? It's because I wanted to give myself a little bit of wiggle room. Currently, that is overhanging the panel, but we'll get rid of it at the end of the day. I'm going to put down my foam tape. I did cut my foam tape in half so that it would be less obvious on the edges. And I'm going to do this for all of them except for the one that is underneath the actual card stock, because that one doesn't matter. So then this one, it was kind of the same thing where there was like this mad rush to purchase the car because of all the incentives that were going on due to, like the quarantine situation. Just one thing to know, when you are putting your foam tape down, you want to make sure that everything is edge to edge, because otherwise your sequins or whatever else you're putting in there will be able to fall out. So you need to make sure that your foam tape is butted up right against your foam tape. And that's why you see me kind of leaving it on the roll so that I can cut it exactly where it needs to be cut. And I do double layers of foam tape to give everything room to shake around. Once that's done, I'm going to use my anti-static tool for embossing around the edges to make them a little less sticky. After I've covered this part, I've covered the whole thing in foam tape. And then I'll go ahead and put the sequins in and adhere the card. So with this one, it was the same thing. It was like rush, rush, rush to get it done. And there was a little bit of back and forth because I wanted heated seats. I wanted my sunroof, moonroof back because I haven't had one since the previous car. And then I wanted a remote start. Apparently there's now fun apps that you can use to do a remote start, so you don't actually have to pay for one, FYI. And he told me that it was no problem to get the heated seats, sunroof, moonroof. Okay, cool. So he starts looking and then sends me a text message that says you cannot get heated seats on a SE. You have to upgrade to the SEL. And I was like, well, on the website, it says that you can get heated seats on a SE, which is true. Eric looked, he sent me the information, it says that you can. So he ends up calling me and he was like, yeah, that's an all-wheel drive Fusion. By the way, we upgraded to a Fusion. It's an all-wheel drive Fusion, which is, he's like, I know it's wrong on the website. Our manufacturer is changing it. He's like, what I can do for you is give you an extra $500 for your trade-in, which will cover the cost of adding heated seats in after the fact. So I did get my car. They delivered it to my house. I signed the paperwork on my front porch while we were social distancing. And then he drove away with my car. The part that was the most surprising was during the great car clean out of 2020, because I am a disaster when it comes to cars. I'm not even going to try to pretend like that's not true. I live in my car. There's trash in there. There's all kinds of things. We found something in the trunk. This is shameful, but it's true. We found something in the trunk that was so moldy that we literally could not identify it. I originally thought it was a bagel. Eric also thought it was a bagel, but then there was something in the middle that we couldn't figure out what it was. Nathan takes one look at it and he's like, it's a pumpkin. For sure, it was a pumpkin. This Halloween? Last Halloween? Halloween before that? I honestly don't know. But thankfully, it was stuck to a plastic bag, so I could just pull the plastic bag out and throw the whole thing away. But then Eric was teasing me about, like, you're all worried about getting coronavirus and we're dying of, like, pumpkin fever. And I was like, nobody's dying from pumpkin fever. You're so dramatic. But yeah, so we had to clean out the car, shampoo all the seats and all that, which is funny because I've never shampooed those seats a day in my life. I've owned that car for how long? I shampooed the seats and then I went to work the next day, and then Dunkin' Donuts gave me one of those silly little paper cups with the lids that don't seal correctly, and then I proceeded to spill coffee all over my passenger seat. Yes, I did. That's what happened. And that is why you don't shampoo your car seats, people, because they'll inevitably get dirty again within 24 hours. Probably not 24 hours. That's just what happened to me, and I was mad about it. So, nonetheless, Nathan, in the middle of the great car clean out, he's doing really good. He's helping me clean everything out, blah, 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 blah. Then all of a sudden, he's sitting in the driver's seat with, like, his little knees pulled up underneath his chin and these huge crocodile tears. And I'm like, buddy, what's going on? And he's like, I don't want to get rid of this car. I don't want a new car. I want to keep this one. And I was like, Nathan, your whole life you have told me that you do not like the color of this car, that the car is too small, and also it's not as cool as your dad's truck. Now all of a sudden you love the car? What happened here? And he starts just sobbing, but it's the car I've had my whole life, which is true. So it was sad. It was sad, and it always is sad to get rid of a car that you love, and it's been a good car. But what he doesn't understand is the transmission in this car is going, and I am not paying for it. So it is time for an upgrade. I knew I was going to have to buy one this fall anyway, and now it's just come a little bit early. Once the new car got here, though, Eric told me, he's been weepy all day long about getting rid of the car. But once the new car actually had arrived, he was totally fine. And then it was exciting, and he's like, I like it. And then, like, that night when we went to bed and we did, like, best part of our day, worst part of our day, he said the best part of his day was getting the new car, but he was also sad to give up the old car. So then that was a little segue for us to have a conversation about how it's totally okay to be sad about giving up things that we love, but sometimes it's okay because you end up with other things that you love. So it was a good conversation. But he just totally surprised me. I did not see them big crocodile tears coming. He's normally not particularly sentimental. So yeah, just didn't really see that happening. So here, back to the car, obviously you can see that everything is put together. You can't really see the foam tape, especially not like when you hold it a certain way. If you hold it with light coming up from the back of it, you can definitely see it. But really, I mean, just when it's like laying down like a card would do, it's not terribly noticeable. I think that it helps that all of the foam tape is uniform in size, so you don't really notice it. And then I did cut my the 7 and the birthday out of glitter cardstock. Some might think that's weird because my child is a boy, but I'm going to tell you my child is the boy who loves glitter paper, and I'm totally cool with embracing that because glitter paper, right? Right. So once I had put this together, I did have to move the birthday up a little bit because the Y was kind of cutting off the face of my little bee, which I was not digging. But then I realized the happiest was up a little too high, so I had to pull that off. It didn't remove any of the color underneath it, so no big deal. And then I just moved it down slightly. I added some glitter to all of the things, and I gotta be honest, because it's alcohol ink, I didn't really expect the glitter to pick up any of the color, but it did. And then I put this little dab of red right on my white bunny's face, and I was so mad about it. Mind you, I'm doing all of this in between mad sneezing fits and snot just pouring out of my face, like somebody left the faucet on. So my fix for that was I went in with some white it's the white version of the Zig glitter pens, and that covered it up for the most part, so no harm, no foul, and then just moved on. That is the whole card. I hope it inspires you to give an edge-to-edge shaker a try. It was super fun to make, and I hope Peanut loves it. Thank you guys so much for joining me, and I will catch you on the next video. Bye.